Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The European Central Bank, the ECB, has just proposed to cease issuing €500 paper notes, and the proposal is being considered by an EU conference in the coming days. The move came after heightened concerns surrounding the use of these high-valued notes in money laundering, financing of terrorism, and other criminal activity. Currently, 1/3 of all cash in circulation in the Eurozone is in the form of these €500 notes. On to discuss all of this with us is James Henry. James is a leading economist, attorney, and investigative journalist who has written extensively about finance, corruption, and global tax evasion. James, it's good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
So James, describe for us the problem here. What is the role of these high-valued bills in corruption, money laundering, and criminal activity?
Well, they play a central role. I first wrote an article back in 1976, 40 years ago, about this problem with respect to the $100 bill. That time there was about 4 $100 bills per capita in circulation. But even then, most Americans had never seen one. And it turned out that they were extensively being used in offshore drug trafficking and tax evasion. Since then, there's now risen to the point where there's more than 30 $100 bills outstanding, about 75% of which is offshore, and it's more than $900 billion, more than $1 trillion in $100 bills. The European Central Bank, in its wisdom, when it introduced the euro in 2001, could have decided not to compete for this business, which is of enormous value to money launderers and drug traffickers and organized crime, people paying bribes, because they want to use cash for anonymous payments, and they have to make big payments. But the ECB decided to compete for this business, and they started issuing even larger notes, not only €100 notes, but €200 notes, and especially the €500 notes, which even today is still worth about $560 each. The Swiss are even worse in a way. 90% of Swiss currency consists of 1,000 Swiss franc notes, which are worth more than $1,100 a piece. So where is all this currency? The total for the Eurozone of big bills is on the order of $630 billion. The total for the U.S. is north of 1.1 trillion. And then we have the Swiss. And so the total for the world is more than $1.8 trillion of these big bills, most of which are just used for money laundering.
So James, why would the ECB and other institutions issuing money want to do this? I mean, in previous eras, you had, I guess, diamonds acting in this role, and one can imagine, in the past that, truckloads of money had to be transported in terms of corruption and illicit activity. But why would the ECB want to facilitate, now being able to encourage corruption by just putting a few big bills in your wallet?
Well, I think part of the answer is that the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve did nothing about the role of the $100 bill for decades, even though the proposal to recall them or to issue just smaller denominations has been out there since for 40 years. Larry Summers, I noted, just wrote a piece this week in the Financial Times proposing a $100 bill recall. Unfortunately, when he was Treasury Secretary 16 years ago, he did nothing about the U.S. $100 bill in circulation during the late 90s.
Yes, I was going to say, now both of you are advocating a recall.
It's one of the few times
Larry Summers and you on the same page very often.
Right. We usually disagree about things, but I'm glad to see he's come around to this position. Unfortunately, it's a little bit late because the consequence of not doing anything about it, about the $100 bill problem back in the late 90s or even earlier, was that when the ECB had to decide to issue euro notes, they had to compete with the $100 bills, and they decided to compete with a vengeance. So they issued all these very large denominations, most of which were issued, interestingly enough, by Spain. About 25% of all the 500 euro notes issued by the ECB have been issued by the Spanish central bank. And that just is very similar to what we found in the early 80s in Florida, when Florida accounted for most of the $100 bill surpluses that were being recorded in the United States. Just an indication of how important the global underground economy and drug trafficking were to this activity. So basically, by not acting back in the late 90s to take the $100 bill out of circulation, or to reduce, or at least have a recall and exchange it for new currency, put pressure, basically, the United States put pressure on the ECB to have to issue its own competitor, and it did so. So that's why 16 years later, the ECB is I'm glad to see that they have finally decided not to issue new notes. But it's a case of, the horse has been out of the barn for quite a while.
And you don't think this new proposal to cease the printing of the 500 euro notes is actually going to address the problem? Why is that?
Well, because it doesn't address the $306 billion euros outstanding of 500 euro notes, or the 250 billion of 100s and 200 euro notes that are already in circulation. They're not proposing a recall or currency swap. They're just going to stop issuing new ones. But the demand for new ones has basically slowed down substantially because the European economy is not growing, and the underground economy in Europe has also contracted along with it. So unless we're really willing to bite the bullet here and do a currency recall, this kind of proposal won't do anything. And it certainly won't affect the $1 trillion of $100 bills that are outstanding.
And how is these large notes used currently? I mean, it's not like you can go to the the corner store or get a cappuccino with these kinds of big bills. How do they use it?
Well, let's say that you're Saddam Hussein. When they opened up Saddam's vaults, he had several $1 billion of $100 bills stashed in his vaults. It's a good savings vehicle. If you're paying bribes, and not just ordinary bribes on the street corner, but you're paying substantial bribes to politicians, $1 million or more, you want to put that in a suitcase and deliver it under the table. And it's much more convenient to do that with euros, 500 euro notes, than it is with $100 bills.
And one can actually go to a bank and deposit these big bills without any questions.
Someone will take them, and in the United States, you're supposed to report cash deposits of greater than $10,000. But there are all kinds of ways around that. If you have a loan from the bank and you pay down the loan, that isn't counted as one of the $10,000 cash deposits. And countries around the world have had a problem just monitoring all the cash flow, and so now we have basically an underground economy that's quite healthy and is using this at will.
And is the European Union addressing this problem because of the heightened watch on terrorism at this moment?
Well, I think that's one of the considerations. They have found that, how does ISIS actually pay its bills? It's using a lot of what we call reserve currency notes. And those include the euros as well as the $100 bills. They're also probably using commodities or gold to clear payments, but it isn't easy for them to have bank accounts. They can't use checks. They can't use the credit cards that most retail customers are relying on. That's one of the reasons that the retail demand for this kind of currency, these big bills, has really declined, because everybody else is using checks or credit cards, or even electronic payments like Apple Pay. But the terrorists don't have access to those facilities, and they have to use cash. So this would strike a direct blow at the terrorist cash economy. It's just not clear why the central banks of the world have tolerated this behavior for so long.
All right, James, I thank you for shining the light on these illicit activities, both official and otherwise. Thank you so much.
Great. You're quite welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.